Hello, welcome to Many Worlds. This is a podcast with Dr. Kevin Henry Villanueva, the inaugural professorial fellow in ethics and international relations in the University of the Philippines.
100 years ago, there was an archipelago of 1,000 islands. Some were big and some were small, and each people lived on an island of their own. One day on an island called Sampaguita, war broke out. The conflict became unbearable, and the peoples on the island called for help. One side said they were one people, but the other side wanted to separate as another people. They were different. They had their own beliefs. They had their own dreams. The peoples on the other islands had a choice to come to the rescue of the peoples of Isla Sampaguita. No one came, and in the end, there was no one on Isla Sampaguita who survived. It was destined to be a long and endless war. It was in nobody's interest to solve the conflict. Everyone was better off minding their own affairs. The waters of the sea between the islands gave the illusion of a horizon of peace and calm and tranquility. But there were tales handed down from the elders of the neighboring islands to their children and theirs. It has been said that there were several who escaped. They flee the war. They took to boats in the night, praying that they would eventually land ashore distant islands. It was a story of great sadness and brutality. The inhabitants of the island could not tell it in any other way but in words of fear and despair. But the children who escaped and survived saw the world in words of longing and hope. Now, as fathers and mothers, they found they had to reckon with the past. It was time to break the silence. Their own children wanted to understand what had happened to their grandparents. Why on such a vast island in the middle of the archipelago there were only ruins, but there were no graves. There were no names. What happened on Isla Sampaguita 100 years ago? My name is Enrique de Salamanca. My father, and before him, his mother and father, had this to tell us. It was a beautiful island. There were roads, canals, bridges, and edifices to plan and build and restore. There were schools, hospitals, and markets to construct. There was a government to elect to manage the daily affairs. There were always things to worry about and fight about. But people lived in harmony. There was always sun and bountiful rain, and everywhere white Sampaguita flowers climbed high and blossomed. Everyone was alive. They spoke more than one language. They wore different uniforms and costumes. On Isla Sampaguita there were many peoples, and they respected each other's deities. They celebrated life as well as death. There was on the island, as in all the archipelago, happiness and eternity. The way of life on Isla Sampaguita was unique and original, because whether in the end there were 2 or 3 or more peoples, all peoples lived totally free and different together. They were sometimes suspicious of each other, but by default they trusted each other until they felt they were hurting each other too much. They knew each other's nature as peoples. As individuals within their communities, they did not, as it were, matter as much, because the freedom they felt as a people was no less than the freedom they felt as individual human beings. They were all kins. But the world of Isla Sampaguita was lost. Its peoples took their promises for granted. The war stopped them on their feet. It began to destroy the houses they built, the soil they plowed, and the seeds they planted. But most of all, mothers were hurt and broken to the heart and soul as they lost their husbands and their sons and their daughters to battle. The sky turned red and the clouds cast dark and low. Only the little children could pick up the sampaguita flowers that fell on the ground. Isla Sampaguita was a forgotten place. It was a place of kinship. How peoples spoke more than one language, wore different dresses, and respected each other's gods. Kinship is because we are of the same kind. Kinship is because we seek company from each other. It is because we seek to understand each other. Kinship is because we cannot be far apart. We need to be close to each other always. There is nothing outside of us. Like the waters of the rivers, the oceans, and the seas, we are inseparable. Kinship spreads, as it were, over land and water and is thus limitless, which begs the question, until where and when does kinship extend? We must make inroads at this juncture because I use the word kinship as the nearest existing equivalent to the way of life on the archipelago, in which Isla Sampaguita was a model of virtue. The peoples on the islands of the archipelago are joined by kinship. Sama-sama, sabay-sabay, hinay-hinay, kami, tayo, kita. Kinship is togetherness. I am because we are. You are because we are. As the nearest existing equivalent of the way of life on the archipelago, I am not using the word kinship in quite an ordinary sense. Kinship is achieved neither by blood nor by the letter of the law. It is something more fragile and delicate in its complexity, and therefore, as a way of life, kinship requires not only a dimension or measure of reason, but a certain sensibility to our disposition as a group. Kins may attach to a family, a tribe, and a village. A distinction must henceforth be drawn in the negative sense of the word. Kinship is not exclusive. It will attach more to families, tribes, and villages in the plural form. Kinship does not attach to any single race or geographical area. It will attach to the characteristics of races and the features of the lands that peoples have in common or share between and among them. In this regard, kinship is never righteous nor superior. Kinship is neither natural nor ordained in the sense that we must live together because we are set as stars in heaven before we were born. Kinship is all-embracing. It is the virtue of kindness in all its forms. Simply put, kinship is all for all. There were 3 cardinal and unspoken rules. The decorum of the island of Sampaguita, that were themselves vestiges of the common way of life in the archipelago. First, in this world among kins, peoples had the habit of a gentle conversation. Second, they had a habit of making promises. They practiced writing them down and held the conviction in keeping their word. Those who chose to betray the community were banished. Finally, peoples, whenever they came close to killing each other, laid down their arms, gathered around together, and agreed to live apart. My grandfather told me to search for these intimations of kinship. He wrote them down like articles of faith, as it were, upon which those who dared could look back on in quiet contemplation and begin again. These were the traces of archipelagic life, and he wrote them as propositions so that in searching for them we could also test and make good of them. In historical terms, the forgotten place was Southeast Asia. The miracle of the sea from which the heritage of this model emerges, and the age of the world is the 20th century. It is the peoples of a greater humanity who live on its islands and cross the waters that we must pluck from obscurity and bestow a present distinction. This is the first article of faith. Who are peoples? This too shall be our first step.
Thank you for listening to Many Worlds. If you would like to follow the podcast, please subscribe by clicking on the link.